All right, so I'm gonna ask you, what do you think? How would you define American theater? What is distinctly American, and what would you say the state of American theater is in LA?
It's hard to define American theater because it's so broad based and it's changed so much over the years, and I don't have great comparison to the rest of the world. I, I know English and Irish theater well. I know some French theater and a little bit of Italian theater. I know some Russian theater and a little bit of Russian theater history. Um, but that's all Western
Mm-hmm.
theater. Um, but in the American theater, I think that there are probably, well, one thing is that it created the musical theater, and it's clearly, I think, worldwide, head and shoulders above everybody else in that particular art form, and um, it's fairly unique in creating a musicalized story, and it goes beyond the opera, which also had done that. But how musical theater itself evolved in its construction is constructed and lives today is pretty uniquely American. Um, what is interesting about American theater is that it has some polar opposites that are always pulling at it. It started out as an extremely popular art form, and then over the years, but particularly in the '60s and '70s, involved into something with the nonprofit theater, where it took more of a social stance, both being part of the social conversation itself, and both being a promoter of social equalities, whereas prior to that it had been simply entertainment. It was commerce. If something was good and entertaining, people went to see it. Now, occasionally you had some bigger, deeper stories like Porgy and Bess that would come out, and yet it lived on its popularity. The American institutional theater started back in the '60s, and there was a movement, and it was underwritten in a lot of ways by the Ford Foundation, to get major arts organizations up in every city across the country. And it was, certainly theaters, there were museums and operas and symphonies, but the idea was to bring culture to the entire community. And so you saw these theaters starting out, Arena Stage, the Center Theater Group, Lincoln Center Theater, the Huntington Theater in Boston, all these, theaters across the country became civic institutional theaters, and so it had a mandate and a mission, not only to put on popular plays, but to speak to their community and to be a meeting place for the entire city. And because of that, there was a need and a desire to have broad-based programming, but also to be part of the cultural conversation. So to take on plays of political or social weight and use them as cornerstones of the conversation. So there's still that tension that exists between the nonprofit theater and the commercial theater. The commercial theater, for the most part, exists as Broadway right now, and any touring Broadway shows that go around the country and play all of these cities, and in almost every major city and many of the small towns as well, these nonprofit institutional theaters. The lines have blurred some over the years, but still, Broadway is about making money, and I think the institutional theater at its heart, while it has to be a well-run business, is still about the art and the craft of theater, and trying to use that craft to move the conversation forward. As far as LA goes, we are the leading institutional theater. We were the one that was put on the hill. We were given these edifices, to fill. But having said that, there are a lot of other smaller nonprofit theaters, and some mid-sized ones around the city as well, that have the same, dual mission. and it's always a balancing act, because ultimately you have X amount of seats in your theater. One measure of success is how many people are sitting in those seats. So certainly popularity is something that, whether we like it or not, we need a certain level of it. By the same token, because we're the nonprofit, we have a mission sometimes to develop and produce shows that inherently don't have a wide popularity. We have to do it in the framework of a business model that survives, and ultimately that's what we're about, is survival. We don't have to make money beyond the level that we need to survive. So we're doing a constant juggling act, I guess, and a balancing act, to keep all of those motivations moving forward.